If you clicked on this video, you've probably watched Arcane Season 2, and you probably feel disappointed. And that's not strange. There were many major problems and flaws with the story they chose to tell. And unlike what all the loud Arcane defenders say on the internet, these flaws weren't just minor issues or only a consequence of needing 1 or 2 additional episodes. Arcane suffers from enormous storytelling flaws that are a consequence of the path they chose to take in Season 2, which was centralized around the anomaly and the arcane. This makes one think, what could Arcane Season 2 have been about? This is the question I'm going to explore in this video with a description of my version of Season 2. And if you really think about it, it's very obvious what Season 2 should have been about, and it would have solved all the problems this season had. But before I can go into my alternative version, we must first go through the flaws that Season 2 suffered from. And now I'm not talking about all the minor flaws, like Vi and Kate having sex in the cell while Jinx was completely illogical for her. These problems have already been discussed by so many YouTubers. Instead, I will talk about the biggest problem this season suffered from, which was trying to tell a story that Arcane isn't about. Controversial, right? Just bear with me. The problem can be summarized by the term promise of the premise, or alternatively, promise and payoff. For those unfamiliar with this term, it's a universal rule in storytelling that is essentially crucial for all stories. If you don't follow this rule, you have major problems with your story. A simple explanation of the rule summarized is that through a story, you build up expectations and promises for the viewer/reader about what to expect throughout the story. This permeates the entire story and builds up successively with great tension for the viewer until it all gets a big payoff in the end. That satisfies the reader, the promise is fulfilled. These promises can relate to character development, themes, and overall plot. Often, all of these come together to create an even stronger viewing experience/payoff for the viewer. If you want to find an example of a series that succeeded with this phenomenally, you need look no further than Arcane Season 1. They followed the rule of the promise of the premise to a T. Let's break it down at the character, plot, and theme level so you get a better understanding of what I mean. The theme for Season 1 can be summarized. Can these 2 different cities, Piltover and Zaun, coexist side by side despite all their differences? The plot for the story builds on this further by exploring the theme with a buildup of tension when both parties develop new technology/weapons, Piltover with Hextech and Zaun with Shimmer. This increases the tension between both parties and makes coexistence more difficult because both parties now have weapons that can annihilate the other, which increases fear and opposition. Both the theme and plot are then beautifully explored through the characters and their character development in connection to each other. For example, Vi and Caitlyn, Jace and Victor, and even Echo and Heimerdinger. Can they collaborate despite the differences in background? Can Kate and Vi stop Silco? Can Jace and Victor develop the technology around Hextech to help people? Can Heimerdinger's mentorship of Echo ease Echo's hatred toward Piltover and build bridges? Jinx has her own character development where she constitutes the answer for the theme, plot, and the other characters' relationships. She is the key to the entire story through a question that can be summarized with Powder. Will she choose to be Powder or Jinx? Will these cities and characters be able to coexist, Powder? Or will everything collapse into full conflict and chaos, Powder? It's Jinx's actions that create the oppositions between characters. The attacks and theft of Hextech from Piltover that force Jace to become more militaristic and prejudiced against Zaun, despite Victor, his partner, being from Zaun. Caitlyn's need to arrest Jinx to prevent further crimes versus Vi's desire to try to save Powder, etc. Meanwhile, it's Powder's actions, or rather lack of destructive actions, that make it possible for the different characters to come closer. The actions that build up during the season. That will we be able to save Powder and coexist? Or will we be able to save Powder and everything will collapse into conflict? It's because of this tension that builds up during the series that makes the end of Season 1 so powerful. Jinx takes over and literally shatters all hope of coexistence and peace by blowing Piltover's council to pieces. To now understand the problems with Season 2, we can go back to the rule about the promise of the premise to understand what promises exist for Season 2. All hope for peace is dead now, and in other words, it's war. The theme for Season 2 should thus be, can these two cities that are at war find their way back to each other and make peace? This theme should permeate the entire season to finally get an answer at the end of the series. The plot and character development should center around this and be permeated by the theme as a red thread throughout the season. What did we get instead for plot? A plot about a mysterious cosmic force that threatens to destroy the entire world if it isn't stopped. Beyond the main plot about the anomaly, we also got some side plots about Mel and the Black Rose, as well as a plot about Echo in an alternative universe. These plots might be cool and animated in powerful ways, but what do all these plots have in common? They have no connection to the actual theme of Arcane. We also got a plot about Warwick/Vander and a plot about Noxus/Embessa's invasion of Piltover. Both these plots could have been connected to the theme of Arcane. The Warwick plot as a reconciling factor, and the Noxus invasion plot as a unifying factor. But instead of being connected to the theme of the series, these two side plots became connected to the main plot about the anomaly and the Arcane. Only Act 1 of Season 2 followed the series theme and had a plot centered around the conflict between Piltover and Zaun. The problem with the series arose later in Act 2 and Act 3 when they completely deviated from the theme and plot around Piltover and Zaun to instead give space for the plot with the anomaly. Apart from all this breaking the rule about the promise of the premise, which is a guarantee to leave viewers disappointed and confused, these plots don't align with the thematic setting of the series either. The entire tone of Arcane is that it's practical and down-to-earth, with hints of magic and larger concepts outside the story, which also gives a feeling of a vast world. The series' focus is on the small people, everyday life, and practical existence. Thus, concepts like magic and cosmos should be kept minimal in the background to not destroy the series' tone. It would give the feeling of a larger world without taking away Arcane's down-to-earth feeling, and it would have made the viewer interested in potential future projects. An additional criticism that several who know League's lore have, and which I still think is worth mentioning, is that the series destroys much already established lore for several characters. For example, there is a character named Camille who is a high-ranking aristocrat in Piltover's leadership, just like Caitlyn. Similarly, there is Renata Glask, who is supposed to be a Kim Baron in Zaun, like Silco. Then there are several other characters in Piltover and Zaun. Apart from the fact that these characters are not in Arcane, Arcane's ending seems to totally remake these characters' stories or make it difficult to get their story in Piltover and Zaun after the events that took place in Season 2. This criticism isn't really relevant for Arcane, since I believe you should see Arcane as its own thing. But I think my alternative version of Season 2 could solve these problems too. How would I have structured the story for Season 2? The story should have been about a great war and conflict between Piltover and Zaun that develops throughout the season to then get a heartbreaking and impactful ending to the story between the different characters we have followed, but still leaves the larger overarching story with the conflict between Piltover and Zaun open and active. This keeps the world open and alive with possibilities for all other stories that can take place with other characters in Zontover and Zaun, while still getting a clear ending to the current story that played out in Arcane. What would that story have been? Jinx has just attacked the council and killed Caitlyn's mother and several leaders. Episodes 1 to 3, Act 1 are perfect and build on this so nicely. The only change I would have made is that I would have skipped Isha completely. Instead, I would have dived deeper into Jinx's madness and instability that was so beautifully built up during Season 1. I imagine Jinx really embracing the identity of Jinx and carrying out resistance against Piltover with full force through acts of terror. She's really a madwoman and villain, where her good side sometimes leaks through. These continued attacks from Jinx and some from the Barons lead to Caitlyn becoming a dictator, etc. I imagine that the hatred among Piltover's people should be through the roof, especially if Jinx and people from Zaun carried out attacks and acts of terror that killed people in Piltover. This could pressure and force Jace to use Hex Tech to equip the military, in other words, build on Jace's hard side from Season 1, especially considering the anger he would feel after the attack. But also that he would likely have given up hope for peace considering they responded to the peace proposal with an act of terror in Season 1, Ep 9. Piltover's cruel response against Zaun would create tensions in relationships. Vi would leave Kate in the same way because of a fight and to be with her people. She can have her full drinking/fighting period with the big police guy. But then maybe she teams up with the Firelights who try to help the population in Zaun and resist Jinx and the Kemba Barons who commit terror attacks against Piltover. She and the Firelights try to find a peaceful solution with well-meaning/peace-oriented people within Piltover, like Mel. Here Mel might explore her new magic powers while trying to help the Firelights. Meanwhile, Piltover's brutality against Zaun and Jinx's active counterattacks with acts of terror lead to the Jinx cult being created. It's much more reasonable that this group is created if Jinx is actually an active party attacking Piltover. Then focus can also be on the Chem Barons, how these people in groups fight more directly against Piltover. Maybe we see the beginning of Renata Glass? In other words, Jinx and her followers stand for more chaotic resistance against Piltover, with terror attacks and spontaneous attacks, while the Barons represent Zaun's more structured resistance with troops and soldiers. Much better than just killing them off in some music videos. When it comes to Jace and Victor, I think their conflict could have become so much better in this story. First of all, the conflict begins with Jace supporting Piltover and providing them with Hex Tech weapons. Victor survives and realizes how to use Hex Tech to save and help others. With this, I mean help via Hex Tech as a technical invention, not as some magical Jesus thing. I envision how Victor leaves Jace and Piltover due to the conflict created when Jace supports the offensive against Zaun. Maybe Victor saves some people from Zaun, maybe some supporters of Jinx, by giving them robot parts improved via his new Hex Tech knowledge. Then, it turns out that these robot parts/improvements were used by Jinx's supporters to carry out additional terror attacks against Piltover. This is maybe when Jace's mother dies. Victor is to blame, which Jace understands because he recognizes the technology from Victor which the terrorists used. This would have been the perfect catalyst for Victor's conviction about the glorious evolution, because he realizes that humans are flawed. Both Jace and those he saved use Hex Tech as weapons and are all completely wrong. Solution: to remove the human factor from his robot improvements. So Victor doesn't just turn body parts into machine when he saves them. He makes their minds and feelings more robot-like with his technology as well, something he's already done to himself. Glorious evolution. The story with Warwick still has much potential. Similarly, the story with Umbessa and the Noxus invasion. I think that Singe should create Warwick. His goal is to stop death and save Oriana, etc. But one change I would like to make is that he actually works for the Chem Barons, and they finance his work because they hope he can develop stronger weapons they can use against Piltover. Additionally, Singe should have several other researchers who are employed by the Chem Barons to learn from Singe. This opens up possibilities for more researchers who exist in Zaun and who might later create Mundo, Zack, or Urgot, etc. I think later that Singe might be captured during a raid from Piltover. This causes him to activate Warwick in the same way as what happened in the series, just that now there's a reasonable explanation. Warwick is intended to be used as a weapon against Piltover. Moreover, maybe Singed wants to activate Warwick to protect his lab/Oriana from Piltover, etc. Meanwhile, maybe Jinx is planning some attack on the prison to kill masses of Piltover people and free prisoners. Vi is there with Firelights to stop Jinx because she will kill several Zaun people simultaneously through the attack. Shows how Jinx is insane. Then the attack from Warwick happens, and Jinx is there fighting, and then sees Vander. This should disturb Jinx's fanatical state. Maybe she comes back somehow? Vi should probably see this, but she's the only one who sees it. Piltover's people, Kate and Firelights with Echo, etc., should still see Jinx as a major enemy. Singed later be recruited by Mbessa. Meanwhile, Kate is slowly getting tired of her dictator role in All the Death. She is slowly getting tired of Mbessa and no longer wants to cooperate with Noxus. This could be done via dialogue and meetings with Mel that is still in Piltover in my version. They are both tired of all the violence and hatred, and Kate maybe gets closer to V and Echo again. Similarly, Jace starts doubting himself and the violence. He hears about Victor's work of saving people by making them more robot-like. He wants to save Victor from this robot state he seems to have put himself in. Jace maybe comes down to Victor's lab, where Victor appears to be doing very inhuman things with people. This causes Jace to stop everything to end their suffering. This leads to them all dying. A scene from the old lore, if you know, you know. I think the season could end with the conflict against Noxus becoming larger. It's Noxus troops that hit hardest against Zaun. So Zaun is against Noxus and Mbessa. Meanwhile, a confrontation arises between Piltover and Noxus. This results in Mbessa being forced to leave Piltover with her troops. I still want to argue that Piltover and then also Mel, who isn't stuck in Black Rose's story, have more soldiers, etc. in their city to drive away Mbessa. This leads to Mbessa preparing her entire army for an invasion. Instead, I think that in smaller scenes throughout the season, you can have seen how she prepared the whole army for a major invasion in case her collaboration with Cat ends. These scenes are also where we could have gotten hints about the Black Rose. Meanwhile, Echo and Heimer have researched the Z-Drive. Similarly, Jace builds and creates more and more Hextech weapons, but he realizes they can be improved with Victor's help. So he gets help from Victor, even though Victor is increasingly robot-like. Jace wants to reconcile with Victor, but Victor is more robot pragmatic and only helps because it is reasonable. Then the great battle begins. Noxus invades and attacks both Piltover and Zaun, which results in both parties being forced to fight against Noxus and defend themselves. It was tough for them. Noxus is strong. This is also where they have a scene between Jinx, Vi, and Warwick, in a similar way to what was in the season-ending a 7-part episode. They fail to save Vander because of something Singh did or so Jinx sacrifices herself in a similar way as Isha did, her redemption. Then the battle against Noxus continues. They appear to be losing until Jace and Victor's improved inventions and Echo's Z-Drive turn the battlefield. Mbessa is wounded. Maybe she is forced to flee, but overall, Piltover and Zaun manage to defend themselves from Noxus. Final scenes. See how Jace tries to reach out to Victor after the victory, but Victor seems to be too far gone in his glorious evolution. They go separate ways. Jinx is presumed dead, but probably isn't. Warwick is to be taken by Singed, who makes the final transformation of him. We can show Oriana and that Singed works under Noxus/Mbessa now. Vi is together with Kate and they work together with the Firelights to try to create more order and collaboration between Piltover and Zaun. Meanwhile, you see how certain houses in Piltover haven't given up on the conflict between Piltover and Zaun, and they don't support Kate's and V's ambition for peace? Maybe Camille's house? Similarly, we can see that several Cambarans are dead in Zaun after the battle against Noxus. But maybe there is a scene hinting at Renata Glass and future Cambaran activity. Similarly, there is a scene showing that Zaun is still a wild place. Several of the doctors who worked under Singed remained, etc. shows that this story is over, but the larger story between Piltover and Zaun continues. Similarly, a scene from Mbessa that teases the conflict in Noxus, which will likely be the next project for Riot.